The summer heat pressed down on the firing range like a heavy blanket, but Sarah Martinez barely noticed. Her focus was absolute as she adjusted her position behind the rifle, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon against her shoulder. At 23, she had been trying to prove herself worthy of combat duty for over 2 years, and every shot mattered. "Another perfect score," muttered Sergeant Davis, shaking his head as he examined her target through binoculars. 200 meters, dead center every single round. Sarah rose from her prone position, dust coating her uniform, and looked toward the group of male Marines gathered near the command tent. Their expressions ranged from impressed to skeptical, but none showed the respect she craved. Despite her exceptional marksmanship scores, despite outperforming most of her male counterparts, the answer was always the same when she requested assignment to a frontline unit. "Martinez, you know the rules," Captain Thompson called out, approaching with his characteristic stern expression. "Women aren't cleared for direct combat roles. Your skills are better suited for training new recruits here at base." The words stung, but Sarah had heard them countless times before. She had grown up in a small Texas town where her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle properly. By age 16, she could outshoot most adults at the local hunting club. When she enlisted in the Marines at 19, she had one clear goal: to serve her country in combat, to make a real difference where it mattered most. But the military establishment had other ideas. "Sir, with respect, my scores speak for themselves," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her frustration. "I've consistently ranked in the top 5% of all marksmen on this base. My endurance tests, tactical knowledge assessments, everything meets or exceeds the standards for frontline deployment." Captain Thompson sighed, glancing at the other Marines who were now openly listening to the conversation. "Martinez, this isn't about your abilities. It's about policy, about unit cohesion, about the reality of combat situations. The men need to focus on the enemy, not worry about protecting a female teammate." "I don't need protecting, sir. If anything, I could be the one doing the protecting." A few of the Marines chuckled, and Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew that laugh. It was the sound of men who didn't take her seriously, who saw her as playing dress-up in a profession meant for them alone. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 combat tours, stepped forward. Unlike the others, his expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Captain, I've been watching Martinez train for 8 months. Her technical skills are undeniable, but combat isn't just about hitting targets on a range." "Thank you, Rodriguez," Sarah said, grateful for any support, even if qualified. "I wasn't finished," Rodriguez continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Combat is about split-second decisions under extreme pressure. It's about watching your buddy take a bullet and still being able to function. It's about psychological resilience that goes beyond what any training can fully prepare you for." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Then test me, Sergeant. Put me in scenarios that simulate that pressure. Give me the chance to prove I can handle whatever combat throws at me." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "The thing is, Martinez, I don't doubt you could handle the pressure. What concerns me is how the other Marines would handle having you there. Would they make tactical decisions based on keeping you safe rather than completing the mission? Would they hesitate in crucial moments?" "That's their problem, not mine," Sarah replied quickly, then immediately regretted the sharpness in her voice. "No," Captain Thompson interjected. "In combat, everyone's problems become everyone's problems. One person's failure can get the entire unit killed." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Patricia Hayes, one of the highest-ranking female officers on the base. Sarah snapped to attention, as did the other Marines. Colonel Hayes had a reputation as a fierce advocate for expanding women's roles in the military, but she was also known for her realistic approach to the challenges involved. "At ease," the colonel said, surveying the group. I couldn't help but overhear the discussion. "Martinez, I've been reviewing your file. Your marksmanship scores are indeed exceptional. Top 2% of all Marines currently stationed here. Thank you, ma'am. However, Colonel Hayes continued, exceptional marksmanship is just one component of combat effectiveness. Tell me, what do you think is the most important quality for a combat Marine? Sarah considered the question carefully. Adaptability, ma'am. The ability to assess changing situations and respond appropriately while maintaining focus on the mission objective. Interesting answer. Most Marines say courage or brotherhood or some variation thereof. The colonel paused, studying Sarah's face. What makes you so determined to serve in combat? And please give me an honest answer, not what you think I want to hear. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this might be her only chance to make her case to someone with real authority. Ma'am, I believe that my skills could save lives. When I'm behind a scope, I can see threats that others might miss. I can eliminate targets at distances that most Marines can't even attempt. In the right situation, with the right support, I could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. And what if you froze up? What if, in that crucial moment, you hesitated because the target was younger than you expected or reminded you of someone back home? Then I would deserve whatever consequences followed, ma'am. But I don't believe that would happen. When I'm focused on a target, everything else disappears. I don't see a person. I see a threat to my fellow Marines. I see something that needs to be eliminated to protect innocent lives. Colonel Hayes nodded slowly. You speak with confidence, Martinez. Perhaps too much confidence for someone who has never faced actual combat. Maybe so, ma'am. But the only way to prove I can handle combat is to be given the opportunity to try. The opportunity to try, Colonel Hayes repeated thoughtfully. In combat, Marines don't get opportunities to try, Martinez. They either succeed or people die. There are no second chances, no do-overs, no training environments where failure just means running extra laps. Sarah felt her hopes beginning to sink, but she pressed on. I understand the stakes, ma'am. I'm not asking for special treatment or lowered standards. I'm asking for the chance to meet the same standards as everyone else and be judged accordingly. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spoke up again. Colonel, if I may, there might be a way to give Martinez the test she's asking for without putting lives at unnecessary risk. Colonel Hayes raised an eyebrow. Go on, Rodriguez. Advanced combat simulation training, ma'am. Full psychological stress testing under simulated combat conditions. Live ammunition exercises with hostage scenarios, time pressure, multiple targets, friendly fire risks, the works. If Martinez can maintain her marksmanship standards under those conditions, it would go a long way toward proving her readiness. And if she fails, Captain Thompson asked, then she accepts current assignment limitations without further complaint, Rodriguez replied, looking at Sarah. Fair enough, Martinez. Sarah felt her heart racing. This was more opportunity than she had hoped for, but also more pressure. If she failed these tests, her dreams of combat deployment would be permanently crushed. If she succeeded, she might finally get the chance to serve where she believed she could make the greatest difference. Fair enough, Sergeant. When do we start? Colonel Hayes held up a hand. Not so fast. These tests would need to be officially approved, and they would need to be comprehensive enough to satisfy any skeptics. We're talking about potentially changing policy based on the results, which means everything would need to be documented and verified. I understand, ma'am. Furthermore, the tests would be designed by combat veterans with multiple deployments. They would be specifically created to identify any weaknesses or hesitations that might manifest under stress. You would face scenarios that would challenge not just your marksmanship, but your decision-making, your psychological resilience, and your ability to function as part of a team under extreme pressure. Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. I accept those conditions, ma'am. Give me 48 hours to consider this proposal and discuss it with the appropriate commanders. If I approve these tests, you'll get exactly one chance to prove yourself, one opportunity to demonstrate that you're ready for what you're asking for. Are you certain you want to stake your future on that single opportunity? I am, ma'am. Colonel Hayes studied her for another long moment, then nodded curtly. Very well. I'll be in touch. As the colonel walked away, followed by Captain Thompson and the other Marines, Sarah found herself alone on the firing range with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. You know, Rodriguez said quietly, I wasn't entirely honest back there. Sarah turned to look at him, confused. Sir? I said I wasn't sure how the other Marines would handle having you in combat. The truth is, I've seen how some of them react to female Marines in non-combat situations. There's still a lot of old-school thinking in the Corps. Are you trying to discourage me, Sergeant? Rodriguez shook his head. Actually, I'm trying to prepare you for the fact that even if you pass these tests with flying colors, your biggest challenges might not come from the enemy. They might come from winning the trust and respect of the Marines you're supposed to serve alongside. Sarah considered this soberly. She had experienced subtle discrimination and skepticism throughout her military career, but she had assumed that exceptional performance would eventually overcome such attitudes. How do I deal with that, Sergeant? The same way you deal with everything else, Martinez. You prove yourself through actions, not words. You show them that you're not just a good marksman. You show them that you're someone they can trust with their lives. And that trust has to go both ways. You have to trust them to have your back, even if they're initially skeptical of you. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's conversation in her mind. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made to reach this point, the social life she had given up to focus on training, the relationships that had ended because her partners couldn't understand her military dedication, the countless hours spent on shooting ranges and in physical training while other people her age were building civilian careers. She thought about her father, who had been both proud and worried when she enlisted. He had taught her that marksmanship was about more than just technical skill. It was about discipline, patience, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. But he had also warned her that the military was still largely a man's world, and that she would face challenges that her male counterparts would never have to deal with. You'll have to be twice as good to get half the recognition, he had told her, before she shipped out for boot camp. But if anyone can do it, you can. The next morning brought news that Colonel Hayes had approved the comprehensive testing program. Sarah would have 2 weeks to prepare for a series of evaluations that would determine her future in the Marine Corps. The tests would include everything from advanced marksmanship under simulated combat stress to psychological evaluations designed to identify any potential weaknesses in her mental resilience. Word of the upcoming tests spread quickly throughout the base, and Sarah found herself the subject of intense scrutiny from her fellow Marines. Some were supportive, curious to see if she could back up her confident claims. Others were openly skeptical, placing bets on whether she would wash out before completing the full battery of tests. The first phase of testing began with traditional marksmanship evaluations, but with added psychological stressors. Sarah was required to maintain her shooting accuracy while loudspeakers blared the sounds of artillery explosions and gunfire. Smoke machines created visibility challenges, and time limits added pressure to every shot. She excelled in these initial tests, maintaining her characteristic precision even under the simulated chaos. But she knew that the real challenges lay ahead. The psychological evaluation sessions were particularly intense, designed to probe for any hidden anxieties or hesitations that might manifest in actual combat. Tell me about a time when you've had to make a split-second decision that affected other people, the psychologist asked during one session. Sarah thought carefully before answering. During a training exercise last year, Our squad was practicing urban warfare scenarios. I was providing overwatch from a rooftop position when I spotted what appeared to be an enemy combatant moving toward an ambush position where my teammates would be exposed. I had about 2 seconds to decide whether to take the shot or call out a warning. What did you do? I took the shot. It turned out to be the correct decision. The target was indeed an opposing player in the exercise, but I had to make that choice without complete information. And if you had been wrong, if the target had been a civilian or a friendly combatant, then I would have had to live with the consequences of that mistake. But in that moment, based on the information available to me, neutralizing the potential threat was the decision most likely to protect my teammates. The psychologist made notes in his file, his expression revealing nothing about whether he considered her answer satisfactory. As the days of testing progressed, Sarah felt the weight of scrutiny from the entire base. Every test was watched by groups of Marines, some hoping to see her succeed, others waiting for her to fail. The pressure was unlike anything she had experienced before, but rather than crushing her confidence, it seemed to sharpen her focus. The final phase of testing would be the most challenging, a live fire exercise with multiple targets, time pressure, and scenarios designed to test her ability to make ethical decisions under extreme stress. Everything she had worked for would come down to her performance in this single, comprehensive evaluation. Standing on the firing range the evening before the final test, Sarah practiced her breathing exercises and visualized successful completion of various scenarios. She had trained her entire adult life for this opportunity, and she was determined not to let fear or pressure undermine her performance. Tomorrow would determine whether she would be given the chance to serve in combat or whether she would spend the rest of her military career wondering what might have been if she had only been given the opportunity to prove herself where it mattered most. The morning of the final evaluation dawned gray and overcast, with a cool wind that carried the scent of rain. Sarah arrived at the testing facility before sunrise, her equipment meticulously prepared and her mind focused on the challenges ahead. She had spent the previous evening reviewing her notes from weeks of preparation, but now it was time to put theory into practice. Colonel Hayes waited near the entrance to the combat simulation facility, accompanied by a panel of observers that included several high-ranking officers Sarah had never seen before. The presence of these additional evaluators made it clear that her test results would have implications far beyond her individual career. "Martinez!" Colonel Hayes called out as Sarah approached. "Are you ready for this?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Before we begin, I want you to understand exactly what today's evaluation entails. You'll face 7 different scenarios, each designed to test specific aspects of combat performance. These scenarios are based on real situations encountered by Marines in recent deployments. Some will require split-second decisions about engaging targets. Others will test your ability to prioritize multiple threats. All will challenge your capacity to maintain precision under extreme pressure." Sarah nodded, checking her equipment one final time. Her rifle felt familiar and reassuring in her hands, like an extension of her own body after years of training. "Furthermore," Colonel Hayes continued, "these tests are being recorded and will be reviewed by military leadership at the highest levels. If you succeed today, you may become part of a pilot program that could change how the Marine Corps approaches female combat deployment. If you fail, it may set back similar opportunities for other women by years." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy pack, but she refused to let it show in her expression. "I understand, ma'am." The first scenario placed her in an urban environment where she had to identify legitimate targets among civilians while dealing with limited visibility and time pressure. Moving through the simulated city streets, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her in high-stress situations. Her breathing steadied, her vision sharpened, and everything except the immediate tactical situation faded from her awareness. She identified 3 valid targets within the 15-minute time limit, taking precise shots that would have eliminated each threat without endangering nearby civilians. The evaluators watched silently, making notes but offering no feedback as she moved to the next scenario. The second test involved long-range precision shooting while under simulated artillery bombardment. The noise was overwhelming, and the ground shook with each simulated explosion, but Sarah found her center and delivered accurate shots at targets positioned at distances exceeding 800 meters. Her hands remained steady despite the chaos around her, and her shots found their marks with mechanical precision. As the testing progressed, Sarah noticed that her performance was drawing increasingly focused attention from the observers. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had advocated for giving her this opportunity, watched each scenario with obvious tension, clearly understanding how much rode on her success. The fourth scenario presented the greatest psychological challenge yet, a hostage situation where she had to neutralize multiple threats without harming innocent captives positioned dangerously close to the targets. This test required not just marksmanship skill, but the ability to make rapid tactical assessments under pressure. Sarah positioned herself carefully, studying the scenario through her scope. The targets were positioned to make clean shots extremely difficult, requiring precise timing and perfect accuracy. She took her time, controlling her breathing and waiting for the optimal moment when she could engage each target with minimal risk to the hostages. Her first shot eliminated a threat that was holding a weapon to a captive's head, the bullet passing within inches of the innocent person. Her second and third shots followed in rapid succession, each one precisely placed to neutralize a threat without endangering nearby civilians. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, but it represented years of training and preparation compressed into a few crucial moments. By the time she completed the seventh and final scenario, a complex multi-target engagement that required her to prioritize threats based on their proximity to friendly forces, Sarah had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded the performance of most male Marines who had attempted similar evaluations. Colonel Hayes approached as Sarah secured her weapon and prepared to leave the testing facility. Outstanding performance, Martinez. I've seen hundreds of Marines attempt these scenarios, and very few have demonstrated your level of precision under stress. Thank you, ma'am. However, performance in simulation is still not the same as performance in actual combat. Are you prepared for deployment if these test results support that recommendation? Sarah felt her heart race with excitement and nervousness. Absolutely, ma'am. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself on a transport aircraft heading toward a forward operating base in Afghanistan. Her deployment orders had come through faster than anyone expected, partly because of an urgent need for skilled marksmen in the region where she was being assigned. She was joining Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, a unit that had recently suffered casualties during operations against insurgent forces in the mountainous terrain near the Pakistani border. The company commander, Captain James Mitchell, had specifically requested additional sniper support after intelligence indicated increased enemy activity in their area of operations. The flight gave Sarah time to study the operational briefings and familiarize herself with the tactical situation she would be entering. The region was known for complex terrain that favored defenders, with numerous caves and elevated positions that insurgent forces used to launch attacks against coalition forces and Afghan civilians. When the aircraft touched down at Forward Operating Base Thunder, Sarah was struck by the stark reality of the combat environment. Unlike the controlled conditions of training facilities, this base showed clear signs of recent enemy action. Blast barriers were positioned around critical structures, and she could see repair work being conducted on buildings that had obviously been damaged by rocket or mortar attacks. Captain Mitchell met her at the aircraft, a weather-beaten veteran whose serious expression immediately communicated the gravity of the situation. "Martinez, welcome to Fob Thunder. I hope you're ready to put your training to immediate use." "Yes, sir." "Good, because we've got a situation developing that may require your particular skills. Intelligence suggests that insurgent forces are planning a major attack on a village about 15 kilometers from here. The village has been cooperating with coalition forces, providing information about enemy movements, and the insurgents want to make an example of them." As they walked toward the company headquarters, Captain Mitchell briefed her on the tactical situation. "The village is positioned in a valley surrounded by hills that provide excellent observation and fields of fire for anyone controlling the high ground. Unfortunately, that's exactly where the insurgents have been establishing positions." Sarah studied the terrain maps and satellite imagery that Captain Mitchell showed her. The tactical challenge was immediately apparent. Any force trying to defend the village would be vulnerable to attacks from multiple elevated positions, while any attempt to clear those positions would be extremely costly in terms of casualties. "What's the plan, sir?" "We're going to establish a defensive perimeter around the village and try to identify and neutralize the insurgent positions before they can launch their attack. Your job will be to provide precision fire support from a concealed position where you can observe the surrounding hills." Over the next 48 hours, Sarah worked with the company's intelligence team to identify potential firing positions and likely enemy approaches. She studied every detail of the terrain, noting wind patterns, potential concealment positions, and fields of fire that would allow her to support the Marines who would be defending the village. The night before the operation, she conducted final equipment checks and reviewed the operational plan one more time. She would be positioned on a rocky outcrop about 800 meters from the village, with clear lines of sight to the hills where enemy forces were most likely to establish positions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been assigned to her team as a spotter, conducted a final briefing on communication procedures and contingency plans. "Martinez, tomorrow you're going to face the real test. Everything up to this point has been preparation. Are you ready?" "As ready as I can be, Sergeant. Remember, in combat, perfect shots don't exist. You take the best shot available under the circumstances, and you live with the results. Don't second-guess yourself, and don't hesitate when you have a clear target." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about the village they would be defending. She had met some of the villagers earlier that day, farmers and shopkeepers who had chosen to trust coalition forces with information about insurgent activities, despite knowing the risks involved. Their decision to cooperate had made them targets, and now their lives depended on the ability of Bravo Company to defend them. The operation began before dawn, with Sarah and Rodriguez moving to their designated position under cover of darkness. The rocky outcrop provided excellent concealment and clear fields of fire, exactly as the intelligence team had predicted. Sarah settled into position, adjusting her rifle and testing her communications equipment. As the sun rose, she began systematic observation of the surrounding hills, looking for any signs of enemy movement or preparation. The village below appeared peaceful in the early morning light, but intelligence reports indicated that insurgent forces were already in position and preparing for their attack. At odd 800 hours, the first sign of enemy activity appeared on the eastern ridge. Through her scope, Sarah could see movement among the rocks about 1,200 meters from her position. She reported the contact to Captain Mitchell while maintaining observation of the area. "Overwatch, this is base. Can you identify specific targets?" Sarah adjusted her scope, studying the enemy position carefully. "Base, Overwatch. I can see at least 3 individuals. Appears to be a crew-served weapon position. They're well concealed, but I have intermittent visual contact. Copy, Overwatch. Continue observation. Do not engage without specific authorization." Over the next hour, Sarah identified multiple enemy positions on the surrounding hills. The insurgent force was larger than intelligence estimates had suggested, with at least 15 individuals positioned at various locations around the village. They had chosen their positions well, taking advantage of natural concealment while maintaining fields of fire that would allow them to attack the village from multiple directions simultaneously. At 9:30 hours, the enemy attack began with mortar rounds impacting near the village center. Sarah watched through her scope as insurgent fighters opened fire from their concealed positions, directing automatic weapons fire toward the Marines defending the village perimeter. Overwatch Base. You are cleared to engage targets of opportunity. Priority is crew-served weapons and leadership targets. Sarah felt the familiar calm settle over her as she transitioned from observer to active participant in the battle. She identified her first target, an insurgent fighter operating what appeared to be a machine gun from a position about 1,000 meters away. The shot was challenging due to the distance and the target's partial concealment, but well within her capabilities. She controlled her breathing, accounted for wind and elevation, and squeezed the trigger. The target dropped immediately, and the machine gun position fell silent. She quickly identified her next target, an insurgent who appeared to be directing the fire of other fighters from an exposed position on the western ridge. Her second shot was even more precise, eliminating the target and causing visible confusion among the nearby enemy fighters. Over the course of the next 20 minutes, Sarah systematically engaged targets across the battlefield, prioritizing those that posed the greatest threat to the Marines defending the village. But as the battle continued, it became clear that the insurgent force was larger and better organized than anyone had anticipated. Despite Sarah's precision fire and the defensive efforts of Bravo Company, enemy forces were beginning to advance on the village from multiple directions simultaneously. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the radio with obvious strain. All units, be advised that we have multiple enemy forces advancing on the village. Estimate at least 50 insurgent fighters, possibly more, requesting immediate air support. Base, this is air support. Negative on immediate air support. Aircraft are committed to another mission and will not be available for at least 30 minutes. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. Bravo Company was outnumbered and would have to hold their positions without air support until reinforcements could arrive. Through her scope, she could see insurgent fighters advancing on the village from 3 different directions, using the terrain to mask their approach. The situation was rapidly becoming desperate, and Sarah knew that her precision fire, while effective against individual targets, would not be sufficient to stop a coordinated assault by such a large force. The Marines defending the village were fighting courageously, but they were being steadily overwhelmed by superior numbers. It was then that Rodriguez spotted something that would change the course of the entire battle. "Martinez, look at the northern ridge, about 1,500 meters. Do you see that group moving along the ridgeline?" Sarah adjusted her scope and immediately understood what Rodriguez had identified. A large group of insurgent fighters, at least 30 individuals, was moving along the northern ridge in a formation that would bring them to an elevated position directly overlooking the village. If they reached that position, they would be able to attack the village defenders from above, making the Marines' defensive positions untenable. "Base Overwatch! I have eyes on a large enemy force moving to establish positions on the northern ridge. If they reach their objective, the village will be indefensible. Copy, Overwatch. Can you engage?" Sarah studied the enemy formation through her scope. The insurgents were moving in a tight group along a narrow trail, following what appeared to be a leader at the front of the formation. The distance was at the extreme range of her rifle's effectiveness, and the targets were moving, making accuracy extremely challenging. But she also realized that this might be the opportunity she had trained for her entire career. If she could eliminate the leader of the advancing force at the crucial moment, she might be able to disrupt their advance and buy enough time for reinforcements to arrive. "Base, I can attempt to engage the lead element, but I'll need them to stop moving for a clear shot." "Understood, Overwatch. Stand by." Sarah watched through her scope as the insurgent force continued its advance toward the position that would give them tactical control of the entire battlefield. In a few more minutes, they would reach their objective, and the battle would effectively be lost. Everything now depended on her ability to make one perfect shot under impossible conditions. Sarah steadied her breathing as she tracked the insurgent leader through her scope. The enemy formation had paused momentarily as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of the ridge trail, but she knew they would resume their advance within seconds. This was her moment, perhaps the only chance she would get to disrupt their assault before they reached the commanding position that would spell disaster for the Marines defending the village below. The mathematics of the shot were daunting. 1,500 meters to target, with a crosswind that was gusting unpredictably through the mountain valleys. The target was partially obscured by the rocky terrain and would be visible for only a few seconds as he moved through a gap between two large boulders. Sarah would have to account for the bullet's flight time, the target's movement, atmospheric conditions, and the weapon's ballistics, all while operating under the extreme stress of knowing that 50 Marines' lives hung in the balance. Rodriguez provided wind readings and range estimates, his voice steady despite the chaos of battle raging around them. Winds gusting from the southeast, approximately 8 to 12 knots. Range to target 1,520 meters. Target appears to be moving at roughly 3 kilometers per hour. Sarah made micro-adjustments to her scope, calculating the complex ballistics involved in the shot. Her father had taught her that precision shooting was as much art as science, requiring intuitive understanding of how environmental factors would affect bullet trajectory. Years of training had developed that intuition into an almost supernatural ability to sense how each shot would behave in flight. Through her earpiece, she could hear Captain Mitchell coordinating the desperate defense of the village. All units, enemy forces are advancing on positions 2 and 3. We need immediate suppression of the Northern Ridge approach or we're going to be overrun. Base, Overwatch has a possible solution, Sarah radioed back. I have the enemy leader in my sights, but I need him to remain stationary for approximately 3 seconds for a clean shot. Overwatch, whatever you're planning, do it fast. We can't hold these positions much longer. Sarah watched through her scope as the insurgent leader gestured to his followers, clearly preparing to resume their advance. She had perhaps 10 seconds before the opportunity would be lost forever. Every muscle in her body was relaxed, except for her trigger finger, which rested against the trigger with precisely the right amount of pressure. Not enough to fire, but ready to complete the shot the instant conditions were optimal. The leader raised his hand, stopping the formation as he studied the terrain ahead. For a moment, he was perfectly still, silhouetted against the rocky background in a way that provided Sarah with the clean sight picture she needed. She exhaled slowly, letting her natural respiratory pause create the stable platform necessary for extreme precision. In that moment of absolute stillness, her entire world contracted to the view through her scope. The sounds of battle faded, the pressure of the situation disappeared, and there was only the target and the crosshairs. Sarah squeezed the trigger with the same deliberate control she had practiced thousands of times on firing ranges. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she immediately began tracking the bullet's flight toward its target. At 1,500 meters, the bullet would take nearly 2 seconds to reach its destination, an eternity in combat terms. Through her scope, she watched the insurgent leader suddenly stumble backward, the impact of her bullet clearly visible even at that extreme distance. The effect on his followers was immediate and dramatic. The tight formation that had been advancing purposefully toward their objective suddenly dissolved into chaos, with individual fighters seeking cover and abandoning their coordinated advance. Base, Overwatch. Target down. The enemy formation is breaking up and seeking cover. Their advance on the northern ridge has been halted. Rodriguez, who had been observing through binoculars, grabbed Sarah's shoulder with obvious excitement. That was an incredible shot, Martinez. I've seen a lot of snipers in my career, but I've never seen anything like that. The psychological impact of their leader's sudden elimination rippled through the entire insurgent force. Sarah watched as enemy fighters across the battlefield began withdrawing from their positions, apparently unwilling to continue the assault without their commander's leadership. Within minutes, the coordinated attack that had threatened to overrun the village had collapsed into a disorganized retreat. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the radio with obvious relief and amazement. All units, enemy forces are withdrawing from all positions. Repeat, enemy forces are in general retreat. Outstanding work, Overwatch. That shot just saved this entire operation. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah felt the full weight of what had just happened settling over her. In the span of a few seconds, she had eliminated a key enemy leader at an extreme distance under the most challenging conditions imaginable. More importantly, that single shot had prevented what would have been a catastrophic defeat for Bravo Company and saved the lives of the villagers who had trusted coalition forces to protect them. Over the next several hours, intelligence teams confirmed the significance of Sarah's achievement. The insurgent leader she had eliminated was identified as Ahmad Massoud, a regional commander who had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the province. His death not only disrupted the immediate assault on the village, but also eliminated a key figure in the insurgent network. Captain Mitchell personally visited Sarah's position to debrief the engagement and express his appreciation for her performance. Martinez, I've been in the Marine Corps for 15 years, and I've never seen a single shot have such immediate tactical impact. You didn't just hit a target today, you changed the entire course of this battle. Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing much more than your job. You demonstrated exactly the kind of capability that our critics said female Marines could never provide in combat. Today, you proved them wrong in the most decisive way possible. Word of Sarah's achievement spread rapidly through the military command structure. Within days, she received a visit from Colonel Hayes, who had flown to Afghanistan specifically to meet with her and assess the implications of her performance in combat. Martinez, your actions here have attracted attention at the highest levels of military leadership, Colonel Hayes explained during their meeting. The shot you made has been analyzed by ballistics experts, and they're calling it one of the most technically difficult successful sniper engagements in recent military history. Sarah felt both pride and bewilderment at the attention her actions were receiving. Ma'am, I appreciate the recognition, but I was just applying the skills I learned in training to the tactical situation I was facing. That's exactly the point, Martinez. You proved that a female Marine can not only perform effectively in combat, but can excel under the most demanding circumstances. Your achievement is going to influence military policy regarding women in combat roles for years to come. The formal recognition of Sarah's performance began with a Bronze Star Medal for Valor, presented at a ceremony attended by senior military officials and members of Congress. But the real significance of her achievement lay not in the awards she received, but in the doors her success opened for other women seeking to serve in combat roles. Captain Mitchell submitted a detailed after-action report that became a case study in military training programs. The report analyzed not just the technical aspects of Sarah's shot, but also her overall performance as part of a combat unit under extreme stress. The conclusion was unequivocal. She had not only met the standards expected of Marines in combat, but had exceeded them in ways that saved lives and achieved tactical objectives that would have been impossible without her unique capabilities. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had initially been skeptical about women in combat roles, became one of Sarah's strongest advocates. I've served with a lot of Marines in combat situations, he told military investigators who were studying her performance. Martinez didn't just prove she could function in combat, she proved she could be the difference between mission success and mission failure. Any unit would be lucky to have her. The psychological impact on other female Marines was immediate and profound. Sarah began receiving letters from women throughout the military who saw her achievement as validation of their own aspirations for combat service. For many, her success transformed abstract possibilities into concrete goals they could work toward. One letter particularly moved her, from a young Marine named Jessica Chen, who had been inspired by Sarah's story to pursue sniper training. "Before hearing about what you accomplished, I thought the barriers to female combat deployment were too high to overcome. Your success showed me that excellence in performance can break down even the most entrenched resistance to change." But Sarah's achievement also attracted criticism from some quarters. Traditional voices within the military establishment argued that her success was an exception rather than a rule, and that expanding women's combat roles based on one extraordinary performance would be a mistake. These critics pointed out that combat effectiveness required more than exceptional marksmanship, and that the physical and psychological demands of sustained combat operations might still favor male Marines. Sarah addressed these criticisms directly during congressional hearings on military personnel policy. "I'm not arguing that every woman can or should serve in combat roles," she testified. "What I'm arguing is that those women who can meet the standards should be given the opportunity to prove themselves. Judge us by our performance, not by preconceived notions about what women can or cannot accomplish." Her testimony was bolstered by detailed performance data from her deployment, which showed that she had not only met all physical and psychological standards for combat service, but had excelled in ways that went beyond traditional measures of effectiveness. Intelligence analysts credited her with disrupting enemy operations throughout the region, as her reputation for precision and lethality had a deterrent effect on insurgent planning and operations. The long-term impact of Sarah's achievement became clear over the following years as military policy evolved to provide greater opportunities for women in combat roles. Her success became a reference point in policy debates, demonstrating that gender-based restrictions on military service were less about inherent capabilities and more about institutional resistance to change. 3 years after her deployment to Afghanistan, Sarah was promoted to gunnery sergeant and assigned to the Marine Corps' premier sniper training facility, where she became responsible for training the next generation of precision marksmen, both male and female. Her curriculum emphasized not just technical shooting skills, but also the mental discipline and tactical awareness necessary for success in combat environments. During training exercises, she often shared the story of that crucial shot on the Afghan ridge, not as a tale of personal heroism, but as a lesson in preparation meeting opportunity. "Every shot you take in training is preparation for the shot you might need to make in combat," she told her students. "You can't predict when that moment will come, but you can make sure you're ready when it does." The Marine recruits she trained, representing the most diverse group in the Corps' history, understood that they were part of a transformation in military culture that Sarah's achievement had helped make possible. Her success had proven that excellence transcended traditional boundaries, and that the military's mission was best served by utilizing the talents of all qualified individuals, regardless of gender. Sarah's reputation extended far beyond the military community. She became a sought-after speaker at universities and leadership conferences, where she discussed the importance of persistence in overcoming institutional barriers. Her message was simple but powerful. Exceptional performance could break down even the most entrenched resistance to progress. In one memorable speech at the Marine Corps War College, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a firing range in Texas to a rocky outcrop in Afghanistan, where a single shot changed the course of a battle and, arguably, the course of military history. "I didn't set out to become a symbol or to prove a point about women in combat," she said. "I set out to serve my country in the way I believed I could be most effective." The shot I made that day in Afghanistan wasn't about gender politics or social change. It was about doing whatever was necessary to protect the Marines I was serving alongside and the innocent civilians who were counting on us for protection. She paused, looking out at an audience that included many of the senior officers who would shape military policy for the next generation. But if my experience can help create opportunities for other qualified women to serve where they can make the greatest contribution, then I'm proud to have played a part in that progress. The village that Sarah had helped defend became a symbol of successful coalition cooperation with local populations. The residents erected a small memorial commemorating the battle, including a plaque that honored the Marines who had defended them and specifically mentioned the Angel Sniper who had saved their community with a single, impossible shot. Years later, when Sarah visited the village as part of a veteran outreach program, she was greeted by children who had been born after the battle but who knew her story from their parents. One young girl, perhaps 8 years old, approached her with serious eyes and asked, "Are you the lady who saved our village with one bullet?" Sarah knelt down to the girl's eye level and smiled. "I'm the lady who was part of a team that protected your village. And I hope that when you grow up, you'll remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is be ready when people are counting on you." The girl nodded solemnly, then surprised Sarah by adding, "My father says you proved that anyone can be a hero if they're brave enough and good enough at their job." As Sarah reflected on that conversation during her flight back to the United States, she realized that the true significance of her achievement wasn't the technical difficulty of the shot she had made, or even the immediate tactical impact it had achieved. The real importance lay in demonstrating that opportunity and capability should be matched without regard to traditional assumptions about who could serve where. Her single shot had saved 50 Marines and an entire village, but its broader impact had opened doors for countless women who would follow in her footsteps. In breaking down barriers through excellence rather than activism, she had proven that the strongest arguments for progress were made through performance rather than politics. The legacy of that moment on a rocky outcrop in Afghanistan continued to influence military policy and inspire new generations of service members who understood that the ultimate measure of any Marine wasn't gender or background, but the willingness and ability to perform when it mattered most. Sarah Martinez had proven that when the moment of truth arrived, what counted wasn't who pulled the trigger, but whether they could make the shot that needed to be made. Today, she continues to serve as a training instructor and mentor, passing on not just technical skills, but also the understanding that excellence knows no boundaries. Her students, representing unprecedented diversity in the Marine Corps, carry forward the lesson that she demonstrated with a single, flawless shot. That when lives hang in the balance, performance is all that matters, and extraordinary achievement can come from anyone with the skill, courage, and determination to rise to the moment when everything depends on getting it exactly right.